everyone, to our presentation, Closing Deals with an AI Governance Plan. We're going to talk about top considerations for digital health companies building and deploying AI. My name is Rebecca Gwilt. I am the co-founder and partner of Nixon Gwilt Law, and we're a boutique practice in the US where we help digital health and healthcare technology companies navigate law and policy to build great businesses. I am joined by my colleague, Sam Pinson, and we are excited to kick off what will be the third in a four-part series on AI that we've done this year, aimed at helping digital health companies make sense of the AI and policy landscape. It's moving fast, so it's possible that some things in this presentation will expire in the next week or month. But our team here is going to be sharing as much as we can on LinkedIn, on our blog, and via our monthly newsletter as things develop over the next couple of years. So go ahead and follow us and sign up if you haven't already. Quick disclaimer, while we are lawyers, we are not your lawyer. Today's presentation is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal advice. We always encourage you to have a candid conversation with your attorney. And if you're looking for one, you can visit us at nixongwiltlaw.com/get-started. All right, so today we're going to explore some of the most significant challenges my clients have faced this year, in particular those clients building and selling AI-powered digital health solutions. Key to navigating these challenges is going to be understanding their roots, which we're going to discuss up front, and then taking action to mitigate or eliminate those, as we will cover toward the end of today's presentation. As some of you surely already know, selling to large healthcare buyers is difficult, but companies selling AI or AI-powered digital health solutions are facing additional hurdles. We are seeing longer sales cycles and increased scrutiny from buyers as compared to what we're seeing with other digital health companies, other digital health tools. The buyers are responding to pretty rapid adoption of AI by tightening their review processes and taking a much more cautious approach. Many are creating new vetting processes and adding either super complex or even prohibitive contract terms, and that's making it harder for AI companies to navigate these sales. On the seller side, companies are also facing heightened regulatory risks, though much of that remains to be seen, and the need for stronger internal compliance, which is adding even more friction. These are significant hurdles. However, if you've got the right tools, you can create opportunities to differentiate yourself and really win out. In the slides that follow, we're going to take a look at what's causing these shifts and how companies can position themselves for success in the evolving landscape. So today's section is going to be structured around four key questions. The first is, what are these challenges? What are the challenges companies are facing when selling AI tools? And we're going to start by looking at common roadblocks that companies are encountering, related to the regulatory landscape, but also the commercial landscape. Understanding these challenges is really essential to building a strategy that's going to resonate with large buyers. The second question is, why is an AI governance plan vital for organizations deploying AI tools? Often governance plans are seen as sort of a nice to have. I'm hoping we'll change your mind about that today. Buyers are increasingly demanding that vendors not only show the value of their AI, but also their commitment to responsible use. It is becoming a ticket to ride with buyers of this technology. And a well-structured governance plan ensures that you can demonstrate your AI systems are fair, transparent, secure, and safe. The third is then, okay, it's important, we get it. What does it take to actually establish trustworthiness in healthcare? That's becoming a core criterion for buyers. And this includes transparency in data use, ethical considerations, minimizing bias, and ensuring the system performs as it's intended. Implementing a robust AI governance plan can demonstrate the trustworthiness of your solution. And the last is, how can I build and implement an AI governance plan? So we're going to explore practical steps for creating and executing a governance plan that satisfies buyers and mitigates risk. We're going to walk through a real-world scenario with a made-up AI solution and show you really how it's done. So let's dive into the risks that companies are facing today. Sam's going to take over from here.
Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, and to Rebecca's point, we're going to start with walking through a series of risks ranging from those present during the sales cycle to legal and regulatory risks, and then some background as to, why is all this happening? Where is this risk kind of stemming from? From a sales cycle perspective, there are kind of four key risks that we've identified over the last, 9 to 12 months when counseling our AI clients. The first of which is kind of the advent of these AI governance committees at large health systems and provider groups. These committees are relatively new, unstandardized, and they're somewhat difficult for vendors to navigate. And kind of the genesis for these committees are that systems and providers want to validate and understand a vendor's AI risk before they, bring them into the fold and into the system or group. The second, and of course, a key component of a legal consideration are the increasingly stringent language in contracts. We're seeing systems and provider groups shift, what in some cases is an unacceptable amount of risk onto the vendors of these, generative AI products to limit risk to their organization. And while it probably is a little bit granular, some of the things that we've seen are indemnification, that is, coverage on behalf of the vendor for any negative outcome based on the AI tool, very stringent terms around data use, flow down requirements to underlying AI model vendors. That is, right, whether you're building an AI model, from scratch or using kind of a larger frontier model like ChatGPT from OpenAI to power your platform, and what those requirements look like. And then importantly, we're also seeing the largest buyers implement requirements around responsible AI practices and audit mandates on vendors of AI solutions, which of course, to a lot of, smaller and venture-backed organizations is not always tenable financially to comply with those types of requests. So from a contracting perspective, we're seeing a lot more kind of risk-averse language throughout these commercial agreements. And practically speaking, and moving to the third risk here, some of the larger hospitals and provider groups alike are, pausing altogether on their onboarding of AI solutions just to kind of, take a step back and better understand both the AI and also the data implications before engaging in any kind of formal conversations with AI companies. And lastly, kind of there are the remnants of institutional review boards, right? The groups that typically approve contracting cycles with AI companies. And we're seeing this take around 6 months to complete. Vendors often have to provide some sort of clinical evidence or evidence of, in the administrative context, kind of the performance that the model has achieved and kind of the background metrics to prove that. Next slide. Moving to legal and regulatory risk, right? So one thing does remain the case in the AI field, and that is that there still is not kind of a central legal or regulatory framework that just wholesale applies to all healthcare AI solutions or AI solutions generally for that matter. But there are some kind of regulatory and litigation trends that are directly impacting healthcare AI companies today. From a regulatory perspective, one of the biggest ones is the Federal Trade Commission, and how they're starting to ding companies for anything from misleading health claims to fraudulent or incomplete data in their privacy policy in terms of use documentation. The second is the FCC, right, and how they're navigating the kind of explosion of robocalls and how that implicates consumers and what kind of notices and disclaimers are required. And then, kind of your twin regulators on the healthcare side are HHS and FDA, kind of regulating the use of AI from a data privacy perspective, and then also, in the likes of the FDA from a medical device perspective. And the thing to note between those four agencies, a lot of their rules already do apply to healthcare AI companies, right, in the same way that they would to any kind of innovative healthcare product. At the state level, we've seen kind of an explosion of proposed bills in just about every state across the country. Some that are leading the way here are California, Colorado, and Utah, each of which has enacted some form of AI, requirements with varying effective dates, right? So from a state perspective, we're seeing a variety of different compliance obligations emerge, and how you navigate those will, ultimately set the stage for your kind of national strategy. From a litigation perspective,
Uh-oh, Sam has frozen. I'll take over a little bit. We all have seen the lawsuits that came out of a certain very large payer, and those are really based on existing law around discrimination, things that are already illegal as applied to AI use case. Sam, if you're back, you can take back over if you like.
Yep, I'm back. Sorry. Calling in from Florida here. We have some internet difficulties sprouting up. I think that we've covered the payer lawsuits, if that's right.
Yep.
In moving to malpractice, right, and where that liability sits. Typically that's going to be with the provider, but there are some kind of emerging frameworks around, what kind of malpractice liability should, be associated with AI systems. And of course, kind of going back to that stringent contract language, there will be, breach of contract, claims and cases based on, the reps and warranties made throughout those agreements, whether that's, about the performance of the model or, commitments from a data sharing and privacy perspective. And then, lastly, kind of taking a step back, there are, of course, reputational risks kind of embedded throughout all of these legal and regulatory considerations, right? If you're subject to a lawsuit or kind of one of these enforcement actions, there is kind of an immediate reputational hit that could be associated with those actions. Next slide. All right, so why is this happening, right? It seems like over the last year, there have been countless kind of regulatory, legal, association, and industry updates. And we want to try and unpack and explain, why this is all happening, where this is coming from. And probably the biggest one is that there is no universally applicable law or regulation on the books that governs generative AI, companies broadly, right? And without that kind of clear legal framework, there's kind of this emerging patchwork of state level rules, association guidance, and then kind of bulletins and press releases from some of the bigger agencies that are, regulating some kind of, limited use case of generative AI. Second, while we're seeing some kind of, consensus from a governance perspective, there's still no universally applicable process for ensuring responsible AI use. Buyers' current processes, while they may have some risk mitigating kind of, programs built into their organizations, they're not necessarily geared towards vetting new AI technologies. And this is kind of exacerbated by, while we do have industry best practices that are encouraging development of these processes, building in real-time risk mitigation for generative AI tools is simply not there yet. In building these practices in real, some of these institutional buyers, like we covered earlier, to kind of pause, take stock of what's going on from a generative AI risk perspective, and slow down the pace of implementation and decision making. And this kind of goes part and parcel with the fast moving technological evolution that we're seeing, right? It seems like every other week there's a new model that is more efficient than the last and has, broader capabilities than the one released a quarter prior. So that's kind of an underlying, push factor for why this is happening. And like we've, covered earlier, there's this low risk tolerance for large AI, buyers of AI solutions. It's still new and unfamiliar, so buyers are defaulting to what we would consider a more conservative approach. Because some of these risks right now are just unquantifiable. There's a growing realization of AI threats, and then also safety concerns, right? Because we're focused in the healthcare sector, we need to, kind of, pause and think about what the implications are for patients and clinical decision making, and how that ties together with the risk analysis. And lastly, here we have inertia, right? Unless there's something that establishes true consensus, whether that's with AI overall or in the healthcare field, this kind of gray area and confusion is going to continue unless something equally as compelling slows it down from a regulatory perspective. All right, and this is kind of the one of the key takeaways here is that AI governance is the answer, right? It's not just about complying with state and federal law. When you talk about AI governance, that's kind of the next step forward, and can serve as a key differentiator for companies, right, who separate themselves from competition by adopting and adhering to their own responsible AI practices. If you have two kind of equally compelling solutions, the one that has an AI governance plan in place will have kind of a compelling argument as to why it should be moved forward in the sales cycle process, with systems and provider groups. Ultimately, you're also going to have the chance to build just a better product in a healthcare setting when you take the time to consider kind of the pitfalls, fairness in the model, efficiency, and efficacy, right? So when you implement a governance program that has to take stock of model drift and performance, you're inherently improving the product itself. Governance principles, of course, mitigate risk. That's kind of one of the common themes throughout this presentation is the role of governance in mitigating risk, not only to the vendor, but also to the ultimate buyer of your AI solution. And then again, kind of taking a step back, there's also this broader societal benefit from just focusing on, if nothing else, core AI principles, preventing bias, in investing in and increasing safety, because ultimately that creates opportunities for equitable and improved patient care, and also efficiency and usability.
Okay, and I am, and Sam is monitoring the Q&A bar. So if you have questions as we go through, I know this can be dense stuff, but we will try to answer and stop if further discussion is warranted. All right, so we just talked about all sort of state of the union, right? This is what we're seeing on a day-to-day basis as we're negotiating these contracts between our clients and the biggest payers and hospitals and health systems in the country. These are sort of the trends that we're seeing. And it is our belief that building an AI governance program is setting some of these companies apart in these sales process. And before you can build an AI governance program, it's helpful to understand the various frameworks you can lean on when analyzing and documenting how that your technology is safe and trustworthy and effective. I just want to make one quick note on AI regulation. Sam touched on it a bit, but in our March webinar on AI law and policy, we laid out the legal framework for healthcare AI in this country, which continues to evolve. At a high level, federal regulations are still quite limited. We're seeing agencies enforce current laws, as we mentioned when we talked about the payer suits. And those laws sort of prohibit discrimination and prohibit unfair trade practices under existing law. HHS, the Department of Health and Human Services, published a limited law regarding AI deployed as part of certified EHR technology. And then on a state level, as Sam mentioned, California, Colorado, also Delaware, Maryland, New Hampshire, New York, they've all passed some form of AI regulation, which applies to AI deployed in their state. And then associations like the American Telemedicine Association, the American Medical Association, the National Academy of Medicine, and some more sort of pointed industry groups, which we'll talk about a little bit later, they've all passed frameworks to self-govern their profession regarding AI use in healthcare. But all of these frameworks that we're seeing are derived from core principles laid out by the White House in 2022 and 2023. That is the AI Bill of Rights and the Executive Order on Safe, Secure, and Trustworthy Development and Use of AI. In addition, HHS proposed an additional set of principles called the FAVES, which apply to, which they integrated into their rule on CERT technology. So there's that framework as well, and that FAVE stands for fair, appropriate, valid, effective, and safe. The issue is that these frameworks are so vague and high level that in the absence of clear regulatory guardrails, industry has been sort of left to develop their own frameworks and principles. And it's working hard to get ahead of the government regulators to develop their own standards and sort of self-police to prevent the government from sort of imposing unduly burdensome frameworks. So based on the various federal principles and frameworks and associations and other industry stakeholders are developing more context-specific frameworks. And of course, companies are trying their best to interpret all of this and shove it into contract language that we're seeing, none of which is uniform. So like many other healthcare laws, we're likely to eventually have a patchwork of state and federal regulations by which healthcare technology companies are going to need to abide. This is very similar to how HIPAA, how privacy and security is regulated in this country. It's unlikely that clarity is going to arrive anytime soon, so I would not wait for that. What we do know is that some common themes and frameworks are driving much of the policy here in the states and at the federal level. So we're going to walk you through in this section a high-level overview of the most well-developed frameworks out there today. But keep in mind that none of these have the power of law yet. They are our best guess at this point in time for how to demonstrate compliance.
Right, and kind of one of the biggest frameworks here that we've seen is that framework from NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's a group out of the Department of Commerce. In this framework, some on the call may be familiar with it, but it comes from the AI risk management framework that NIST published several years back, but has since updated with generative AI considerations. And these are kind of their AI risk and trustworthy characteristics, right? And these ultimately need to be implemented to arrive at a valid and reliable, kind of safe and secure program. Specifically, these factors are AI safety, right? And from a healthcare perspective, that ultimately boils down to clinical safety and patient safety, security and resilience, right? Those on the call familiar with healthcare are certainly aware of kind of the breadth of data privacy considerations that go into any healthcare organization that's exchanging patient data. And this kind of builds upon that. The third is explainability and interpretability, right? And ultimately this comes down to a consumer protection perspective, seeing that what the model is doing is explainable, and we can kind of trace back how it arrived at a given output. Privacy enhanced, kind of builds on that overall security and resilience topic. Fairness, of course, and with harmful bias being managed is always going to be a key consideration, especially kind of in the non-discrimination context with some of these AI models and outputs, regardless of whether those are clinical or administrative in nature. And then the last two here are kind of the role of accountability, transparency, validity, and reliability, right? Just making sure that those in the organization that are deploying AI are kind of responsible for some of the decisions that are being made from a top-down perspective, and then also that the model itself is valid and reliable. And ultimately, NIST's view is that creating some sort of trustworthy AI program requires balancing each of these factors based on the AI's context and the specific setting in which it's deployed. So this is our Sharp Enough framework. If you were, on our first webinar, we kind of talked about this framework where we've looked across all of the different association guidance, proposed regulations at the federal and state level, and kind of built one framework harmonized for healthcare AI. And our view is that this is a risk-based approach to implementing healthcare AI solutions. And we can ask questions at each stage of the Sharp Enough framework, right? Starting with security and privacy. The first question there is, Have we implemented security measures that are comprehensive, but also have we implemented measures that protect data and ensure that the AI was trained on the appropriate data sources? Ultimately, the goal there is to minimize patient privacy risks and compromises of patient data. The second is human oversight, right? And since this field has evolved, that can be human in the loop, human supervision. And from a healthcare perspective, this includes clinical oversight by providers, and then also, administrator oversight when AI in healthcare is used in an administrative context, like with prior auths. And the question here is, do we have a protocol for human oversight? Ultimately, one that can ensure safety and accountability, which parlays nicely into accountability. And we just want to better understand here, who is designated in the organization as kind of the point person that's responsible for AI tools decisions, and how is that ensured throughout the framework and workflow with the organization. Moving to reliability and accuracy, right? The key here is whether or not you can confidently explain how an AI tool was developed, trained, and also ensuring that stakeholders across the organization can ensure reliability and accuracy, of course, which is important for an institutional buyer, right? That they can ensure that deployed across their health system is one that is reliable and accurate. Patient safety, right? Kind of a core theme of AI governance in healthcare is ensuring that in the clinical and administrative context that the tool's recommendations are valid and safe, and are also, working towards preventing harm to patients. Effectiveness is kind of part and parcel with patient safety, right? Has the model been rigorously tested to ensure that it delivers on the promises that are made to users? Notice and transparency, right? Getting back to that consumer protection kind of theme here. Want to make sure that we're informing patients, but also the providers and other healthcare kind of decision makers about the AI tools being used, and ensuring that the methods behind those use cases are transparent and understandable. And lastly, rounding out our Sharp Enough framework is fairness and bias. Of course, working to assess potential biases in the AI tool, and ultimately that kind of stems from ensuring that the data set used to train the model is diverse and also, geared towards ensuring a fair and unbiased outcome.
So hopefully you're starting to see a pattern here. We've got, the NIST framework: safe, secure, resilient, explainable, fair, privacy enhanced, reliable. Sharp Enough contains many of those things. The Health AI Partnership, which is an organization mostly made up of hospitals and health systems, but also large technology companies aimed at sort of addressing health inequities that could be exacerbated through AI technologies, have a 5 principles, equity principles. Again, you're going to see fitness for purpose, which is a different way to say efficacy, reliability, validity, fairness, which in this case contains, anti-bias, accountability, transparency, and then the CHAI framework. So the Coalition for Health AI is a multi-stakeholder coalition aimed at developing guidelines and frameworks to promote the responsible use of AI in healthcare. They have 5 principles. The difference between the Health AI Partnership that puts together the HEAL principles and CHAI seems to be that HEAL is focused on hospitals and health systems, and CHAI has a little bit of a broader coalition that includes sort of smaller and vendor-focused work that they're doing. And this is, I sit on the best practices work group for CHAI. So, disclosure, like this is my favorite sort of broadly adopted framework. But you'll see that a lot of these principles are the same across the federal government, state legislation, and these sort of industry association principle frameworks. The key is that you just pick one, right? You pick one and you use it to develop your, you use it during your life cycle. They are built to guide development and implementation. So the key question is like, how do we put this into practice? So I wanted to walk through with you how you demonstrate alignment with a framework as you build and deploy your tool. And once you've chosen your framework, again, there's no wrong answer here. Then the idea is you begin to examine your principles in the context of your life cycle. Now, this is a picture of what Chai uses as a product development and deployment life cycle. You could choose your own life cycle. There's, again, no wrong answer. It's important to document your work here because it's going to form the basis of your AI governance program. But what I'm going to do here is actually walk through at a high level what it might look like to consider the core principles as you develop and deploy your technology. So stage one, define the problem and the plan. This is starting sort of with the foundation, defining the problem your AI tool is going to address. The objective at this stage is to ensure a clear understanding of the specific healthcare issue and to establish a strong foundation for development and deployment. So our use case here is going to be a company building a pediatric asthma tool. They might begin by interviewing pediatricians and patients and parents and healthcare administrators to identify common challenges in predicting asthma exacerbations and ensuring a solution that supports clinical decision-making without unduly burdening the users. So you might look at usefulness. For example, what specific asthma challenges are we solving for? Is this solution addressing a gap that current clinical practices are failing to manage? You might want to think about fairness. Are we considering diverse patient populations along socioeconomic, racial, and geographic lines when we're defining what this problem is? How do we make sure that this tool will benefit all these subgroups, especially the historically underrepresented subgroups? You might think of usefulness. How will this tool integrate with existing clinical workflows, and what metrics will you use to define success? The goal is to outline exactly the problem you're solving and how your solution fits into existing workflows and what success looks like, but you want to look at this through the lens of the principal framework that you're using. The second stage is designing the AI system. So once you clearly define the problem, the next step is to sort of capture detailed requirements for the AI system. You developers on the line will know what I'm talking about here. At this stage, you're considering your technical specifications, your workflow integration, and your deployment strategy. Going back to our original example, you might ask questions about safety. So how will we ensure that AI outputs are presented in a way that minimizes potential misuse or misinterpretation by clinicians? You might think about usability. How the user interface going to be designed to present these complex sort of insights in a simple, actionable format. You might think about transparency. What information are you going to include in the user interface to explain how the AI reached its conclusions, its output? Are the decision paths clear and understandable to the end users who are going to be relying upon them? And maybe you think about usability. So how can we integrate a human in the loop feature to make sure that clinicians can override or adjust the AI recommendations? For our pediatric asthma tool, the company might consider building a user interface that shows pediatricians the risk scores and recommended interventions, explaining the factors contributing to the risk score, such as environmental triggers, to ensure clarity and safe decision-making. You'd also want to ensure that the data requirements are mapped out and the quality controls are built in. And getting these details right is pretty crucial because these design decisions will influence the usability and success of your tool in practice. The third stage is actually engineering the AI solution. It's time to start building. The focus here is on developing and validating the AI solution to make sure it meets the defined requirements and performs reliably. So again, we look at our principles. Maybe we look at fairness. Does the training data reflect the diversity of the target population? Are the relevant subgroups in the patient panel well represented? You might think about safety. What are the criteria for defining acceptable and unacceptable performance of the tool? Have we defined thresholds for accuracy and sensitivity to minimize harm to patients? You might think about transparency. How will we document the data sources and the feature selection and the modeling choices to make sure that future reviewers can understand and can audit the model? So in our example, you'd want to train it on a diverse data set that reflects the target population so that you're working toward reduction of bias and improving generalizability. You might pull data from multiple hospitals to include patients of various demographics and socioeconomic backgrounds and test using historical data to validate the model's accuracy and reliability. And of course, you'd want to establish some mechanisms to detect model drift and put monitoring processes in place so that any performance issues can be addressed proactively. All right, so now you've built it, but you don't want to deploy it yet, right? At this point, you want to really assess and test the system. So you might ask, how has the AI been tested in a controlled setting? Are we confident that will not produce unsafe recommendations under different clinical scenarios? Transparency, are we communicating any limitations of the AI system to the users? Is there a clear understanding of when the AI tool might need to be overridden? And then accountability. Who's going to be responsible for monitoring the tool's performance after deployment? Do we have a designated team for incident management? Who's going to be accountable? For this tool, in our made up hypothetical, we've done a silent evaluation, right? That's where the tool runs in the background to collect real world data, but it doesn't yet impact clinical workflows. These small deployments can allow you to fine tune the tool before it's fully operational, which goes to safety, of course. And at this stage, this is where you want to validate the tool's HIPAA compliant and any other relevant regulations are taken into account. And don't forget about your end users and their ability to understand and use the solution. This is where training or developing training protocols can be really helpful. All right, and now we're at the pilot stage, step 5. So now you want to deploy the AI solution, but you're going to do it on a small scale so you can gather real-world data and refine the system before a broader deployment. For instance, you might want to pilot your asthma tool in a single hospital so you can evaluate its impact on workflows and patient outcomes in a more controlled environment. You want to collect detailed feedback on the tool's usability and effectiveness and the impact on clinician workflows and adjust the system based on those insights that you're gathering. Again, you want to go back to your principles. Maybe you think about fairness. Are we collecting feedback from all types of users? Primary care, specialists, parents, patients? Are there patterns of usability specific to certain groups? Efficacy, what metrics are we going to use to evaluate whether this pilot is successful? Are we focusing on both clinical outcomes and user satisfaction? And usability, how will we incorporate the pilot feedback to refine the tool for broader deployment so that it's actually used by the folks that you're intending it to be used for? This stage is really critical for identifying any usability or integration issues, and it will help you toward a smoother path for larger deployments. And then finally, the 6th stage, which is kind of when I say finally, I'm only half telling the truth. This is broad deployment, but the work continues from here. This is not just a deployment stage, but it's also a continuous monitoring stage. You need to have protocols in place to ensure that the tool remains safe and effective and aligned with the clinical needs of the customer. So of course, you're looking at safety. What processes do I have in place to detect and respond to safety issues? Are we tracking performance metrics regularly? Accountability, who's responsible for that ongoing compliance and updating the AI system in response to new data or new regulations? And oops, almost. And accountability, right? So who's responsible for ongoing compliance, updating the system? And in many cases, you're going to be going back to earlier levels, right? So maybe you find something out that means you need to re-engineer, or you want to add a feature, so you're going to go back to the define problem and plan. This is sort of a continuous cycle, but at each stage, again, you're going to want to be looking at these key principles and asking yourselves and the folks in your company, are we making sure that we're addressing these key principles during every stage of the life cycle? All right, I want to pause here for any questions that anyone has. It looks like we've had a couple come in the Q&A. Okay, why would someone voluntarily adopt AI frameworks? Yeah, so the reason for that is one, because as I said before, the industry does not want to wait for the government that is already on high alert around the fears around the impact of AI to be the sole entity that is imposing order on the industry. Because in my experience, the government doesn't always get it right. And sometimes with the best of intentions, they regulate and it really impacts innovation. It really impacts, frankly, like the positive outcomes that could have been had by an innovation. And so industry has banded together with government in many cases to say, we can self-police. Let us adopt this framework. Let us self-police, and you don't regulate. Like, let us handle it as the industry. A good example of this is like Joint Commission. So industry would much rather voluntarily adopt an AI framework than wait for government to look at industry and say, hey, you guys aren't doing your job to keep us safe. We government are going to have to step in. And the second reason is that buyers in this space are expecting companies to come in their door with an idea about how they're going to ensure their solution is safe, effective, and trustworthy. And these AI frameworks are what is available right now to be able to demonstrate that to buyers. So what I have seen is companies voluntarily putting together some simple, some complex, depending on the sort of the level of risk and the level of maturity of the organization, an AI governance plan that they can take to a big buyer and say, hey, we've already thought about this. You don't have to worry about us. Please don't send us through, the gauntlet on whether you can trust our AI, because here are our studies and here's our AI governance plan. So hopefully that answers your question. It is not necessarily a legal mandate that people adopt AI frameworks. However, if you are subject to the HTI-1 rule, that is true. You will eventually have to abide by those regulations. But there are commercial and strategic reasons why industry is pushing these voluntary frameworks. Okay, Sam, let's bring it home.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca.
Yeah.
So now we're going to talk about how to, actually build an AI governance plan that addresses a lot of the sales cycle risks, the policy risks, and also the legal and regulatory kind of risks in the space, ultimately to get to, these best practices for companies developing AI technologies in the healthcare solution. So we put together this 8-step process for developing an AI governance plan, right? And as we go through each of these, depending on the size of the organization, there is going to be some, give and take and flex around, what kind of resources you're devoting to each one of these steps. So the first one is to clearly articulate the purpose of the AI system and the specific problem that it is intended to solve. And this helps organizations, generally ensure alignment with their overall mission and goals, right? So this might look like outlining specific problems that you aim to solve. Some that we commonly see are clinician burnout, administrative efficiency, and things of that sort. So you want to make sure that, when you're looking at the AI system, that it's actually solving the problem that it was set out to address, right? And not, potentially creating undue risk on a buyer that hopes to implement the solution. The second step is to identify the key stakeholders throughout the organization. This may include your development team and data scientists, clinicians and legal advisors that you have on your team or board, and also patient representatives, and seeing what their key pain points are and what your solution hopes to address. And this looks like defining roles and responsibilities for those stakeholders kind of throughout the AI lifecycle. And where the rubber meets the road is creating your kind of AI governance board or committee, right, that oversees and documents, the necessary pieces of each one of these kind of 8 steps. And what that looks like is delegating responsibility to those parties, planning board meetings or committee meetings, if applicable, kind of looking at how you're documenting AI governance initiatives. And you should also consider diversity of demographics, disciplines, experience, and expertise when developing this board. or committee, right? Because there are so many different AI risks that you need to have different stakeholders at the table to help, build out that governance plan, to make sure that it stands the test of time, right? The third risk here, or the third step along this process is, creating these clear definitions and documenting throughout the risk framework the different types of risks that are associated with AI in healthcare. From a clinical perspective, an output could risk delivering an incorrect diagnosis, inappropriate treatment recommendations, and a whole kind of host of patient safety issues. And population risks, right? So is the data biased, and how does that affect a specific demographic group? So you really want to define and identify these types of risks, while also acknowledging that they could be internal or external. So you could have internal risks, right, that are kind of common with healthcare technologies such as IP and data use, but also IP infringement and other vendor considerations, right, and risks to your third-party vendors that are help developing this technology, if that applies to your situation. And then, you want to put these clear definitions through kind of a risk-benefit analysis. You want to consider the positive and negative impacts of your system on individual users, deployers, the physicians that are involved, and just society at a whole when you're looking at kind of a risk-benefit trade-off with these, rapidly changing solutions. We also, kind of a common thing that we see right now in healthcare and generative AI are these metrics and benchmarks, right? And how you use those to consistently evaluate the program across healthcare settings. And this also includes defining what an adverse event is and what your response to that is going to look like, right? Who do you notify? When do you notify them? And kind of what rises to that level of what crosses that threshold to where you need to send out some sort of adverse event notice or reporting. As we get to kind of the fourth step here, we're looking at conducting pre-deployment assessments, right, that kind of tie into those benchmarks and periodic reviews to ensure that the model is maintaining its required level of performance, right, and not drifting from a generative AI perspective. And where this kind of comes into practice is establishing some sort of monitoring function across the organization, right, to ensure protection, both for your end buyer, but also, throughout your kind of development team, that it's, periodically, complying with the goals that you set out from a performance perspective. The fifth one here, which we've touched on a little bit, is understanding the legal and regulatory environment. So as we've talked about, there is no kind of central framework, but AI systems in healthcare, just like any other healthcare technology, are going to be subject to specific applicable legal and regulatory standards. Some of these standards might require a form of documentation on the developer, deployer of the system, proactive disclosures, and also increased system transparency for buyers and end users, right? So patients that are using the system, and what kind of disclaimers that they see throughout that process. And these requirements are complicated, right? And they do vary based on federal and state guidance. They may be applicable to your system, and depending on the application or context, you may see increased requirements from a regulatory perspective. The sixth kind of step here as we get to the back half of the program is creating standardized operating procedures, right? So documenting the processes for how you're developing and deploying AI, and then once it's deployed, how you're monitoring it and responding to incidences. And also ensuring that these policies are aligned with, not only the regulatory environment, but also just from an ethical perspective, that you're ensuring kind of fairness across the, AI program. Some of these are going to be governed by existing regulation like HIPAA or HTI-1, if that applies to you, but others will not be, right? So creating that standard procedure really helps get to, some sort of consensus for your organization. And, as we close out with kind of the seventh and eighth step here, we move to ensuring transparency and accountability. And what this looks like in practice is developing a framework for communicating AI system capabilities and limitations, and also the risks to all stakeholders, right? Whether that's the buyer, a physician user, an administrator that is using, some sort of administrative AI application, and making sure that these kind of disclosures include content around model performance, case studies that you've used, the type of model used, right? And we touched on this in the beginning of the presentation, but whether you're, there's a big difference between developing your own large language model or some sort of generative AI application in-house versus, layering it on top of an existing model, and what kind of reps, warranties, and disclosures you can make, right? If you're not, totally kind of in control of the underlying model, and what implications that has from a legal perspective, but also from a legal and regulatory perspective, and also from a contracting perspective. We also want to document what kind of training data sources we're using, what kind of benchmarks our program was built against, and bias testing and any other sort of explainability metric that will help kind of communicate those capabilities to a buyer or user of an AI solution. And then kind of lastly, step 8 here, just fostering continuous learning and improvement throughout the organization. So what this looks like is developing some sort of pathway to kind of educate and train those stakeholders on the AI deployment, right? And this might be encouraging feedback, incorporating different types of AI lessons that are learned into future iterations of the product, and also building a transparent kind of response system when adverse incidents do occur, right? And processes for tracking, responding, and recovering from those incidents and errors. So that's kind of our 8-step process, right? Depending on the resources that your organization has, some of these may look a little bit different, but we built this to bring principles into practice, right, in developing this AI governance program.
Absolutely. So hopefully this has been educational. As we wrap up today's session, I just want to share with you a brand new resource we put together to help you make sense of and keep up with the wild world of healthcare AI. The firm's healthcare AI resource library will be available for free at this URL. This new resource includes a variety of materials such as AI primers to help you understand some foundational concepts. It'll include recordings of our past webinars, key one-pagers on critical AI topics, articles to keep you up to date on industry trends, and a comprehensive 50-state AI policy chart that we've been hard at work on to help you navigate the evolving regulatory landscape, which is much more active on the state level for healthcare than it is on the federal level.